Stop! Please stop!
You asked for this!
No! Get out of me now!
Shut up!
She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that he had been watching her for months, that he knew she took her coffee black, that she always chose the parking spot closest to the exit, that on Tuesday afternoons, when the loneliness got too heavy, she would sit in her car for 20 minutes before going inside anywhere. Just sitting, engine off, going nowhere. He knew all of it. She knew none of it. All Elizabeth knew in this moment was the cold of the chrome against her cheek, Michael's hand buried in her hair, and his voice. That specific voice, the one that had never once been raised because it never needed to be, saying things she had spent 45 days training herself to never hear again. She had been so careful. She had changed everything, her name, her hair, her whole life dismantled and rebuilt from nothing, and it still wasn't enough, because the one person she had never thought to hide from had already sold her for $40,000 and a cleared debt, and was probably sleeping just fine right now. And then the scraping started. Something heavy, something patient, dragging slowly across the concrete, like it had already decided how this ends. Michael's grip changed. Just slightly, just enough for Elizabeth to understand that whatever was coming from behind them, he was afraid of it. She would spend a long time afterward trying to decide which man was more dangerous, the one whose hand was in her hair or the one who made him let go. This is The Betrayal. If this already has your heart beating faster, subscribe right now and turn on your notifications, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about who saves you and what that salvation actually costs. Now let's go back to the night it all began. December in Chicago doesn't warn you. It just arrives, iron cold, indifferent, smelling like exhaust and something you can't name until it's already too late. Elizabeth had 45 days. 45 days of new hair, new name, new roots home. 45 days of checking over her shoulder at every elevator, every stairwell, every parking structure that smelled like oil and cold concrete and other people's quiet emergencies. She had been so careful, it had started to feel like breathing, like maybe careful was enough. It wasn't. The plan was simple. 10 minutes, Michigan Avenue parking structure, level 2, grab the groceries, go home. Nobody looks at you when you look like you belong somewhere else. That was the rule she lived by now. Head up, pace steady, eyes forward. She never heard Michael coming. She felt him. That specific shift in the air, the way a space changes when he enters it, like something gets quietly subtracted from everything around you. Her hand was still reaching for the car door when his fingers closed around her arm, then her hair. Then her face found the chrome and the cold hit her cheekbone, and the world collapsed down to just his breathing and the pressure of his grip and the distant rattle of a shopping cart somewhere 2 levels above them, like the rest of the world had absolutely no idea. "Did you really think?" Michael said, almost soft, almost tender, the way he always got right before the worst of it, "that you could just disappear?" She didn't answer. She knew better. That's when she heard it. Scraping. Slow and deliberate. Something hard dragging across concrete. Getting closer the way a tide gets closer. Unhurried, indifferent, already decided. Michael heard it too. She felt it in the way his grip shifted, the way his shoulders changed, the way his voice jumped an octave when he turned. "Walk away. Right now. Walk away." Nothing stopped. The bat came down on Michael's kneecap, and the sound it made was nothing like the movies. Dense, specific, final. Michael didn't scream. He made something smaller than a scream, something that came from a place in him that had never been touched before. And then he was folded against the tire like a question nobody needed answered anymore. The man in the charcoal suit crouched beside him, one knee down. He spoke quietly, so quietly Elizabeth couldn't pull a single word from the air between them. His voice was unhurried, almost conversational, like he was explaining something simple to someone who should have already known better. Then he stood. He turned and looked at Elizabeth, really looked, the kind of look that takes inventory without asking permission. And his face held nothing she could name, not relief, not urgency, not even satisfaction, just patience. The specific patience of a man who had already known how this would end before he ever crossed the parking structure entrance. "Can you walk?" he asked. His voice was the same temperature as the December air, completely level, like her answer didn't change anything either way. Before she could respond, a black car rolled silently to the structure entrance. No headlights, no sound of a call being made, no signal she could identify. It had simply appeared, like it had been sitting somewhere close by, engine running, waiting for a moment that had already been scheduled on the calendar Elizabeth didn't know existed. She looked at the man, she looked at the car, and somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the pain and the shock and the 45 days of careful finally unraveling, she understood that whatever she had just escaped was nothing compared to what she had just walked into. She woke up not knowing where she was. That was the first thing. The ceiling was wrong. Too high, too clean. The kind of ceiling that exists in buildings where every detail has been deliberately chosen by someone with too much money and very specific taste. Recessed lighting set low, warm enough to feel intentional. Sheets that felt nothing like anything she had ever slept in before. She sat up too fast, and the pain reminded her immediately. Slowly, a woman's voice, calm, accented, professional, a slight Korean lilt underneath the English. You have a hairline fracture along your left cheekbone. Moving quickly will not help it. Elizabeth turned carefully. A woman in her 40s sat beside the bed, medical bag open on the side table, expression completely neutral in the way that only people paid for their discretion ever manage. She took Elizabeth's pulse without asking, checked her pupils, made a small note on a slim tablet and said nothing else. Across the room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a Chicago skyline Elizabeth didn't immediately recognize, a man sat reading. Not pretending to read, actually reading, one leg crossed, completely still, a cup of something steaming on the table beside him, like this was simply a Tuesday evening, and she was simply a guest who had arrived on time. "Where am I?" Elizabeth asked. "Safe," he said, without looking up. "That's not what I asked." He turned a page. 34th floor. You're not being held. The door is unlocked." He said it the way people state weather, factual, indifferent, mildly interested in whether she believed him. She believed him enough to look at the door. Then she looked at the window. Then she looked at him. "I need to leave." He closed the book then, slowly, the way people do when they've already finished the thought they were on and are simply being polite about the interruption. He reached for the slim laptop on the table beside him, opened it, turned it to face her across the room. She had to walk closer to see it clearly. She hated that she walked closer. The screen showed 6 feeds, live, time-stamped, running simultaneously. The shelter on Wabash, where she had mentally marked as a last resort. The apartment of the only friend she had trusted with a forwarding number. The parking structure of her secondary grocery store. The entrance of the law office where she had made one quiet inquiry 8 days ago about protective orders. Michael's people, stationed, waiting. Patient, in the specific way that money makes people patient. She stood there for a long time looking at the screen. "You're not a prisoner," Hanwar said quietly from somewhere behind her now. She hadn't heard him move. "But you are out of options. Those are different things." Elizabeth didn't respond. She was still looking at the feed from the law office. A man in a gray coat reading a newspaper that he hadn't turned a page of in 40 minutes. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. She heard him move back to his chair, heard the quiet sound of the book opening again. "Someone who finds your situation inconvenient to ignore," he said finally. It was not an answer. They both knew it was not an answer. And yet something in the specific way he said it, without performance, without agenda she could immediately identify, made her stay standing instead of reaching for the door. She turned around. He was reading again. She walked back to the bed and sat down on the edge of it and looked at the skyline through the glass and tried to build a plan out of nothing, the way she had always done, the way she had always survived. Every exit she constructed in her mind led directly back to one of those 6 screens, and the man across the room turned another page like he already knew that, too. It arrived on the 3rd morning. No announcement, no conversation leading up to it. Elizabeth came out of the bedroom to find a manila envelope sitting on the kitchen counter beside a cup of coffee that was still steaming, which meant someone had been in the suite recently enough to know she was awake. That alone made her skin tighten. Hanwul was at the window back to her, phone to his ear, speaking Korean in the low, unhurried way she was already beginning to recognize as his only setting. He didn't turn around, didn't gesture toward the envelope, didn't acknowledge her at all, which meant the envelope was meant to be opened without ceremony. She pulled out the first page. A wire transfer record. $40,000, moved in 2 transactions across 48 hours, originating from an account she didn't recognize into one she did. Marcus. Her brother's account. The one she had helped him open 6 years ago when he was trying to rebuild after the first round of gambling debts she had quietly covered without telling their mother. She set it down and pulled out the second page. A transcript. Phone call, time-stamped 11 days after she disappeared. Her brother's number at the top, Michael's private line at the bottom. She read the first 4 lines and stopped. Then she made herself read the rest of it, because she was the kind of woman who made herself finish things, even when finishing them costs something. The third item was a photograph. Marcus, shaking Michael's hand outside a restaurant on the north side, smiling. The timestamp in the corner read 2 days after she had called him from a payphone, just to let him know she was alive. Just so someone who shared her blood would know. She stood at the counter for a long time. Hanwol finished his call. She heard him set the phone down on the side table, heard the quiet of the room reassert itself. He didn't speak, didn't offer anything, not anger on her behalf, not sympathy, not the particular kind of careful silence people use when they're waiting to be thanked for delivering bad news. He simply waited, the way a man waits who has learned that some things need to be absorbed before they can be responded to. Elizabeth put the documents back in the envelope in the exact order she had removed them. She aligned the edges, set it back on the counter, picked up the coffee and drank half of it standing there, looking at nothing in particular. Then she rebuilt every assumption she had made about safety from the ground up. Every person she had considered reaching out to, every name she had mentally flagged as possible, as trusted, as worth the risk. She went through them one by one, and she was thorough and she was cold about it, and she didn't let herself feel it until later. Finally, she turned around. Hanwon was watching her with that same unreadable patience. Not curious exactly, more like a man confirming something he had already suspected about the composition of a thing. "What do you want from me?" she asked. He held her gaze for a moment that lasted slightly longer than comfortable. "Not yet," he said. And somehow, those 2 words were more unsettling than anything Michael had ever said to her, because Michael had always wanted something immediately, and Hanwon was willing to wait. And a man who is willing to wait has already decided he's going to get it. Before we go any further, if you have been listening to this story and you feel something moving around in your chest right now, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications, because what Elizabeth is about to find changes everything, and you do not want to be the person who missed what comes next. It started with a system error, a small thing. The borrowed laptop Hanwon had left on the side table defaulted back to a network drive when the browser closed unexpectedly. A filing system she wasn't meant to be inside. Organized with the kind of precision that belongs to people who treat information the way other people treat currency. She almost closed it. She didn't close it. The folder was labeled with her name, not her new name, her real name. Elizabeth Camille Adara, the name she had left behind with everything else 45 days ago. And beneath it, subfolders organized by month: September, October, November, December. Her hands were very still as she opened the first one. Mall security footage. Tagged, time-stamped, annotated in small, clean text along the bottom of each file. September 4th. Coffee shop, level 1, 8:47 a.m. September 11th, sat in vehicle, north lot, 34 minutes, did not enter building. September 19th, fed pigeons near east entrance, 2:14 p.m., 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Someone had noted 11 minutes of her feeding pigeons on a Tuesday afternoon like it was data worth keeping. She went through October, November, dozens of files, every visit, every hesitation, every time she had sat in her car and talked herself back from the edge of something she couldn't name. All of it, catalogued quietly by someone she had never seen, on the orders of a man she hadn't known existed. She heard Hanwol's footsteps in the hallway and she didn't close the laptop. He came into the room, read the situation in approximately 1 second, and stopped near the doorway. He didn't reach for the laptop, didn't apologize, didn't arrange his expression into anything designed to manage her reaction. "Since September," she said. "Yes. You were having me watched since September." "I was having you documented," he said, like the distinction mattered. "There's a difference. Explain that difference to me very carefully." He was quiet for a moment, then he crossed the room and sat down across from her, not beside her, across, the way people sit when they intend to be honest rather than comforting. "Most people who are surviving something look like they're surviving it," he said. "It's visible. It changes the way they move, the way they occupy space. You didn't look like that. You look like someone who had decided something and was simply waiting for the conditions to catch up." Elizabeth said nothing. "That interested me," he said simply. She looked at him for a long time, at the absolute absence of apology in his face, at the specific stillness of a man who had made a decision weeks ago and had no intention of pretending otherwise. The rescue hadn't been coincidence. It had been a choice he made in October, maybe September, maybe the first Tuesday she sat outside with 11 minutes worth of pigeons and a weight she was carrying entirely alone. That should have terrified her. She was still waiting for the terror to arrive. She heard them bring him in just after midnight, two of Hanwol's men moving quietly through the main corridor the way people move when the building is mostly asleep and the work still needs doing. Elizabeth was at the kitchen counter with a glass of water she wasn't really drinking, and she heard the specific sound of someone being walked rather than walking, that particular rhythm of reluctant feet and firm hands, and she should have gone back to her room. She didn't go back to her room. The man they brought in was mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had clearly been reasonable once before a long sequence of choices had made it something else. He sat in the chair they placed him in without being forced, which somehow made it worse, like he already knew the range of what was coming and had decided cooperation was the narrowest path through it. Hanwol came in from the east corridor, no jacket, sleeves still rolled. He glanced at Elizabeth standing in the kitchen doorway and didn't ask her to leave. That was the first thing she filed away. The conversation that followed was almost quiet. Hanwol spoke in a low, measured way, alternating between English and Korean, and the man in the chair answered in short sentences that got shorter as the minutes passed. Elizabeth didn't need a translation to follow the architecture of it. Information had moved that shouldn't have moved. Her floor number, her daily pattern, a gap in the rotation passed to someone connected to Michael's remaining network. When it was finished, Hanwol stood, straightened, and turned to look at her directly. "Do you want him removed?" he said, "or released?" The room was very quiet. She understood what removed meant. She understood what released meant, that this man would walk out of the building and within 72 hours everything he knew would be currency again. She understood both options completely, and she stood there in the kitchen doorway holding a glass of water, and she thought about the 6 feeds on the laptop screen. She thought about the transcript of her brother's phone call. She thought about what it had cost her to be careful, and how little careful had ultimately protected her. She said nothing. Hanwoo held her gaze for one more second. Then he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, toward his men. Elizabeth went back to the kitchen. She refilled her water glass. 40 minutes later, she made herself eat the dinner that had been left covered on the counter, and she sat at the table and she ate all of it, and her hands were completely steady throughout, and that steadiness was the most disturbing thing that had happened to her since she arrived. She had not pulled a trigger, she had not said a word, she had simply stood in a doorway and said nothing, and let the silence mean what it meant. And the part that kept her awake until 4 in the morning wasn't the guilt, it was how quickly the silence had come. She left on a Wednesday, not permanently, she wasn't ready to frame it that way yet, wasn't ready to examine what permanently even meant inside the new geometry of her life. She just needed 20 minutes of ordinary, the specific ordinary of fluorescent lights and cereal boxes and strangers who wanted nothing from her. 6 blocks, there and back, simple. Hanwol's security rotation had a 17-minute gap between 10 and 10:30 p.m. She had been clocking it for 4 days without letting herself acknowledge that she was clocking it. She told herself it was architectural habit. She noticed patterns the way other people noticed color. That was all. She was in the cereal aisle when she saw him, end of the row, third person from the corner, holding a box of something he wasn't reading. Medium height, gray jacket, the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who are paid to wait. His eyes moved to her, and then away, in the practiced way that meant he had already confirmed what he needed to confirm. Her body went cold. She didn't run. Running meant confirming. Running meant chaos in a fluorescent-lit aisle at 10:15 on a Wednesday, and chaos left evidence, and evidence was a currency she couldn't afford. She turned back to the shelf, reached for the thing she had originally come for, set it in the basket like her hands weren't shaking. Then she pressed the small steel button on the inside of the bracelet Hanwol had clasped to her wrist on day 2, without explanation, and she had not asked for an explanation, and she had worn it every day since, without fully letting herself think about what that meant. She kept shopping. Pasta, olive oil, something green because she had been living on ordered food for 2 weeks and her body was beginning to register a quiet protest. She moved through the remaining aisles at the pace of a woman with nowhere particular to be, and by the time she reached the register, the man in the gray jacket was no longer at the end of the cereal aisle. She didn't look for where he had gone. Outside, a black car sat idling at the curb 2 spaces from the entrance. Not Hanwol's usual car, a different one. Same energy. A window came down, and one of his men looked at her from the driver's seat with an expression that asked nothing and offered nothing, except the open door. She put her groceries in the back seat. She got in. She didn't ask what had happened to the man in the gray jacket because she already understood the answer, and asking would have required her to decide how she felt about it. It was easier, she was discovering, to simply not ask, to let the machinery of Hanwol's world operate in the spaces she chose not to look directly at. That was a new skill. She wasn't sure yet whether to be grateful for it or afraid of it. The car pulled into traffic, and Elizabeth looked out the window at the city moving past and realized she had stopped thinking of the penthouse as somewhere she was being kept. She had started thinking of it as somewhere she lived. She found it by accident. Or something close enough to accident that she let herself call it that. Hanwol had taken a call in the East Corridor. She could hear the low cadence of his voice through the wall. Korean, unhurried. The kind of call that settles in for a while. His office door was open. She had gone in looking for a charger she had seen on his desk the previous afternoon. The charger was there. So was an unlocked external drive connected to the open laptop, with a folder sitting unminimized on the screen like it had simply been left mid-review. She told herself she would close it. She sat down instead. The first file was Michael, recent 3 weeks, maybe 4. She recognized his building on the north side in the establishing shot, then a sequence of what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations. She watched him move through the first clip and then the second, and then she began to understand what she was actually watching. His alderman ally arrested on charges that the news had framed as unrelated to anything. Watching the footage, it was clear they were not unrelated to anything. His primary asset account, transactions moving in directions that didn't serve him, quietly, incrementally, the way water moves through stone, not breaking it, just changing its shape over time. His reputation, which had always been his most protected possession, developing small fractures in carefully selected places. A quote here, a photograph there. Nothing dramatic, just steady, patient, architectural dismantling. She watched 40 minutes of it before she heard Hanwol's call end. She should have closed the drive. She scrolled further instead, and then she stopped scrolling. Because beneath the Michael files, organized in the same clean subfolder system she had found on the laptop 2 weeks ago, was her name again. And these files were older, September. A Tuesday afternoon she remembered specifically the pigeons, the east entrance, the weight of a day that had felt too large to carry inside anywhere. She was watching herself from above, from a mall camera angle she had never considered, and she looked smaller than she had imagined herself, and more tired and more determined simultaneously. October, November, herself, moving through the world alone, documented in the specific detail of someone paying very close attention. She heard Hanwol in the doorway. "I didn't build a file on a victim," he said, before she could speak. His voice was level, no apology in it, no performance. "I built a file on someone worth watching." Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment, at the absolute steadiness of his face, at the strange, specific thing it did to her to be seen that clearly by someone she had not chosen to be seen by. She didn't close the drive. She didn't respond either, but her hand, resting on the edge of his desk, stayed exactly where it was. Jeju Island in December was cold in a different way than Chicago. Cleaner, like the air had been rinsed of something. Hanwol had explained it functionally. Her presence at the syndicate meeting was a signal, nothing more. Rival factions needed to see that she existed within his world in a specific capacity. Untouchable. Accounted for. It was tactical the way all of his decisions were tactical, layered underneath with things he didn't explain, and she had stopped requiring him to. She had packed light. She was getting good at that. The meeting itself was unremarkable in the way that genuinely dangerous things are often unremarkable. Quiet rooms, careful language, men who had learned long ago that volume was for people who hadn't yet secured their position. Elizabeth sat where she was placed, said nothing she wasn't asked to say, and watched Hanwol operate with the specific attention of someone who has begun to study a thing without admitting they are studying it. The ambush happened on the transfer between the second and third safe house. It was brief, and it was professional, and it was over in under 4 minutes, which she understood afterward was a testament to Hanwol's men rather than any lack of seriousness in the attempt. She was on the floor of the vehicle with someone's arm across her before she had fully processed the sound of the first impact. By the time she was helped upright, the road was quiet, and the cars were already moving again. It was only when they reached the safe house and the overhead light caught Hanwol at the wrong angle that she saw the dark spreading through the left side of his shirt. Shallow, his medic would have said, not serious. But the medic was in the second vehicle, and the second vehicle had taken a different route as protocol and would not arrive for another hour. Nobody moved toward him immediately. She understood why, in rooms like this, men like Hanwol did not invite attendants to their wounds. She went to the kitchen, found what she needed, came back. "Sit down," she said. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen in his face before. Not surprise exactly, something quieter than that. He sat down. Her hands were steady, the same steadiness that had frightened her in Chapter 5, but different now, purposeful, directed at something she had consciously chosen. She worked carefully, and he was absolutely still throughout, and the room held a quality of silence that felt almost deliberate. Afterward, they sat in the quiet of the safe house while the island went dark outside the window, and after a long time he said, "In my world, Jade is not a title. It is a designation. The one thing a man builds his walls around instead of inside, the last thing he would let go of." Elizabeth looked at the window. "I'm not a possession," she said. "No," he agreed. "That's precisely why." She didn't answer. She didn't move away either. The island was very dark and very quiet, and his shoulder was close enough that she could feel the warmth of it, and she made no adjustment to that proximity. And for the first time since December began, Elizabeth was not thinking about an exit. Michael always did love a room he controlled. The Sinclair Gala was exactly that, a charity event on the 42nd floor of a building where 3 of the board members owed him something, and the security detail had been briefed by someone on his payroll. He had Elizabeth's current identity, her photograph, a legal hold drafted by a judge whose mortgage he quietly serviced, and a private security team positioned at every entry point. He had planned it the way he planned everything, thoroughly, patiently, with the specific confidence of a man who had never once been outplanned. Hanwol's people had been inside since 6:30. Elizabeth knew this because she had watched them go in black tie, unhurried, dispersing through the event space with the calm of people attending something they had been invited to. 12 of them that she counted. She suspected there were more she wasn't meant to count. She wore black. She had chosen it herself. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor at 9:17, and Elizabeth walked out of it without hesitating, because hesitation was a language she had decided to stop speaking. The room was everything Michael loved. Crystal, candlelight, the particular music of money in a room congratulating itself. She moved through it, and people looked at her the way people look at someone who belongs somewhere, and she let them look. She felt the moment Michael saw her. Across the room, through the candlelight and the crystal, she watched his face process what his eyes were sending him. The confusion first, then the recalibration. Then, something she had never seen in Michael's face in 11 years. The specific rearrangement of features that happens when a man realizes he has walked into something he did not design. He looked small. Not physically, in the way that actually matters. Hanwol appeared at her left shoulder without announcement. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence beside her in this room was its own complete sentence. Michael's security moved first, and then every exit closed simultaneously. Not dramatically, not loudly, simply closed, the way Hanwol closed everything, with a patience that had been building since long before tonight. Elizabeth watched Michael understand what was happening, watched him look for the exit that wasn't there, watched 11 years of constructed power encounter something it hadn't accounted for. Hanwol's hand was beside hers, not touching, just present, and she looked at Michael one last time across the room, this man who had taken so much and planned to take the rest, and she gave the smallest nod. It was not a violent gesture, it was an architectural one. The moment a builder decides which wall comes down. 1 week later, Elizabeth walked into the Michigan Avenue parking structure where it had all begun. Hanwol's men were a half step behind her, present and unhurried. She carried her old blueprints rolled under her arm, the ones for the life she had been rebuilding before everything collapsed. She dropped them in the trash can near the elevator without stopping. In her bag was a new drafting pencil and the first sketch of Hanwol's new headquarters. Clean lines, deliberate foundations, designed for a world that operated by different rules than the one she had trained in. She wasn't rebuilding her old life. She was designing something that had never existed on any map. If this story moved something in you, if you felt Elizabeth in your chest somewhere between chapter 1 and right now, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment below telling me which moment got you, and share this with someone who needs a story that doesn't flinch. There is so much more coming, and you do not want to miss what gets built next.